educating people on what this thing called hosted voice, UC as a service, lots of different names for this stuff. And so about 4 months ago, I actually presented very informally to the software development team that works on voice. And that, I think, went over pretty well. People got a lot out of that. And then the word got out that I did that. And so here I am. The way that I see this is that the title is All Things UCaaS. That could easily be a whole semester. An hour a week for 16 weeks. There's a lot to it. This is a beginning introduction, if you will. It's not super deep dive technical. It's not way up in the clouds either. You'll see as we go along what this is all about. The way I see this evolving, though, is that I do see the opportunity for others to get involved in this process of educating the company and educating new people. So I look around the room, and I won't name names to embarrass anyone, but I could see some of you standing where I am today talking more deeply in the weeds about a particular aspect of our business. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about this. So what drives this industry? The way I look at it is really it's an insatiable desire that we all have as humans to communicate and collaborate. This has been going on since we were humans. Started with a very visual medium, smoke signals. That's been going on for tens of thousands of years. The other picture you see here is drums, so audio, the ability to communicate through a long distance drum. That's a not Alex. So the other thing to know about this industry is that it's always evolving. It's been going on since Alexander Graham Bell invented the phone. We still do a lot of talking. Voice minutes are still very much, this is what our business is. We have our customers take and make many, many calls. However, another slide in here which had a bunch of people on their phones. Right? making the first phone call into this industry we call telecom. If you go down to the bottom row there, so much of the early telecom was all analog, and I'll get into a little bit of what that looked like, because it was very human centric, right? Maybe some movies or shows if you're old enough, like I am, to I wasn't there when it happened, but certainly I remember seeing lots of films and movies where you go up to a phone and you crank it to hit the power, and you talk to Sarah in the central office, which is a place where she took all the local calls and then figured out how to physically take a cable and patch it in to get it to where that user, that caller needed to go. And then we got into digital communications, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the inflection points, because there's a couple of things going on over the last 50 years, especially 50 to 100 years. There's a lot of technical innovation, but there was also a lot of market demand for various things. Every innovation created some challenges along the way that had to be met with additional technology or a change to the way that people did business. Mobile telecom. This is vastly changed the world, as you know. We went from these big, gigantic boxes of devices that looked pretty ridiculous out in public using them. Has anyone seen these before? And then we hit VoIP, right? 1997, I'll go into more detail about what happened there, but 1997 was really the pivotal year for voice over IP. And the telecom industry has really started with on-premise. Companies were like, hey, I like the ability to pick up a phone call, have people call me, but I'd really like the ability to have a device within my company so that if Alex and I are in the same company, I don't have to go out to the PSTN, I don't have to talk to Sarah to take that call all the way back into Alex, right? I want to be able to use what was called a PBX to be able to do that internal calling without having to go out to the PSTN. And then we're into VoIP. And all of these changes, when they happened, they really displaced a lot of old stuff. And the acceleration of innovation continues to happen, and every innovation tends to displace or change the preceding one. This is an old-fashioned switching room. So I wasn't kidding. This really happened. There were people, men and women, but mostly women, that were responsible for sitting all day with a headset on, getting people's calls in and figuring out where to patch them to take them to their destination. So what were some of the technology and market drivers for this? So telegraph and telephone. So AT&T, I don't know how many people know this, but the T&T stands for telegraph and telephone. They were really the big, huge monopoly that started this whole industry. And we really went from, as I mentioned, we went from this idea of human middleware, the idea of people patching callers through to their destination, to electromechanical switches. So phones like pulse dialers, if you remember those, the princess phones with you actually dialed the number and spun it, pulse code modulation, I think it's called. Or the touch tone, which is a technology called dual tone multi-frequency, DTMF, you might hear it called. People still use that today, but what's happening there is it's sending signals back into the central office that interprets those to act accordingly. And then, of course, we're into the digital. Then we went into the digital switching market and the soft switch market as well, which we're in today. That's what we use as the basis of our call control, is what's known as a soft switch. 1947, big year, because the transistor was invented that year. That not only changed the telecommunication industry, it significantly changed everything. I mean, if it wasn't for the transistor, we probably would have never gone to the moon. Lots and lots of examples of what we wouldn't have done had that not happened. But what it led to in the telecommunications space is really this idea of take the humans out of this equation and let's use this technology to switch things automatically, right? Based on the user input. So the user dials 555, 5555. The switch on the end knows what that is and how to deal with that. You don't need a human anymore to route that call. The other thing that I want to point out is in the 60s and 70s, there was this technology that the Bell company, so AT&T and others, had called Centrex. Centrex is still around, but the idea with Centrex is the big Bell operating company would say, hey, understand, Mr. Customer, that you're kind of a small company. You can't afford a large PBX to be put into your environment. So what we're going to do is we're going to offer you this service where you basically just have a phone. Sound familiar? You just basically have a phone. That's your location. But it was significantly different than voice over IP. Those phones were directly connected via wires back into the central office. Very limited in terms of scalability, very limited in terms of feature sets. If you look at what happened around the same time, a lot of these other companies were coming out, including the Bell companies, were coming up with what were called PBXs, private branch exchange, that they were selling to larger companies. And the idea there is that if you can't afford that, Centrex was a good option. But the feature set was drastically really, you only got a few things. The other thing I want to point out, this is an incredibly monopolistic industry. It was really around 1982, there was a big legal settlement called the Green decision. I want to do a little reading on that. It's kind of interesting. It's interesting to me because in 1982, they broke up the AT&T and they basically created all these regional Bell companies, like more than a dozen of these across the United States. Fast forward 2019, we're back down to three or four, right? So it's an interesting sort of pendulum swinging away there. The other thing that's really important is standards. So especially in the old world of PBXs, it's really important that there was some sort of standardization of signaling, for example, and I'll talk more about that in a few slides. But that really helped the old industry. It was absolutely critical for the industry. Voice over IP could not exist if standards weren't needed for its operation. And I'll get into a little of that. A couple of acronyms I'll just kind of point out because they're kind of fun. I've got in parentheses SCCP. That stands for the Skinny Client Protocol. And it was Cisco's, and I'll talk more about Cisco and what they did to really disrupt the scene in a bit. But that was their first proprietary protocol, if you will, to have the phones register and talk with the call control agent that they bought. That was replaced pretty soon after by SIP. We all know what SIP is, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I mentioned that PBXs seem to have a lot of features. And the reason for that is market driven. More and more customers started saying, I like this idea of being able to buy a PBX and interface to the PSTN on my own. And again, one big advantage is I don't have to go out to the PSTN every time I make a call to anybody in my company. I just pick it up and dial 4 extensions, and I'm more than an extension and I'm talking to them. I'm not using any PSTN resources. It's not a local. It's not a long distance call. It's just between us and the company. Just like we experience today in our service and solution, is the more customers you get, the more demand and requirements you get from it. Right? This is great, but we want X, Y, and Z as well, and we do that. And that went on for a few decades. And so PBXs ended up having hundreds and hundreds of features. And the reality is that maybe a couple of them are pretty well used, and the rest they kind of niche for various industries and various customers. That is the challenge that every vendor had when they came into the voice world, is you would go to a customer and they'd say, hey, I've got this great solution. And they'd go, well, we you have the customer. And so we had a product manager at Cisco that used to call his backlog the feature request list because it was literally more than 1,000 that he was talking. So kind of interesting how those things work. The other thing that made this a challenging field when the transition of VoIP happened is that many IT departments were separate from telephony. So you would actually have this IT department, and they started managing this newfangled thing called the PC and desktop and all of that. But the telephony unit is pretty much, in most companies, divorced from that. I'll get into more detail as to why that's a problem. But the punchline is VoIP changed everything. It blew up the PBX. It created a highly distributed architecture where these groups really have to talk together and understand each other and really, in order to make this solution work the way it was intended to work, they really have to cooperate. And that was, believe it or not, that's one challenge. That was one of the biggest challenges all the early mobile phones. I don't know that I need to say more other than they're huge disruptors, but also huge opportunities. We're building our own mobile app, right? So lots of opportunities, but in terms of disrupting this industry, it's pretty large. We had a customer while I was at Cisco, after a Ford Motor Company. I don't know if they ever did this or not, but their idea was how to do it. So you guys that well. And I know that there's customers out there doing that. That's been a little slower to take off, but I imagine with 5G, it'll accelerate probably. That's widely known. And then expensive. This is not cheap. This old technology that preceded VoIP is not cheap at all. It was incredibly expensive. You had to pay up front, in many cases, many millions of dollars, not just for the gear, but then you would tack on 20% for maintenance every year. Incredibly expensive. And I say capital intensive because that's an important concept. AT&T, Nortel, all of these old companies expected you to write a check. Right? It's like, oh, I want telephony, I want 1,000 phones, I want a PBX. Great, write me a check for $2 million. And that was paid up front, not as you go basis. 2008 really was a pivotal year, though, for the transition to VoIP, primarily hosted. And the reason can anyone tell me what happened? Probably not by accident, but I'm looking for an even more root cause. Perfect. For those who may not have heard that, it was the Great Recession of 2008. Painful, very, very painful. Probably really close to a depression. Capital flows were just, they weren't flowing. Everything was frozen. And so the reason why hosted voice took off was suddenly there was this model of you don't have to pay $1 million this month. You pay only for what you need, and you pay on a per-month basis. So that was pretty attractive to a lot of customers, and it saved a lot of companies. Certainly, BroadSoft did very well during this time. So the industry has come a long way. We've gone from the really old-fashioned analog phones that look like that, with human operators, to digital phones, mobile phones, flip phones, smartphones. This idea that you don't need a phone anymore, you can use software. And more than just calling. It's not a piece of software that just gives you dial tone or the dial pad. You can do collaboration, and you can do messaging. A lot of things with it. And then we've got devices as well that are pretty sophisticated that phone calls may not be able to get that, but there's a little video. So it's more than just voice. So what is voice? Simply put, it's voice on the internet. The internet was really key and instrumental in driving this industry. It's voice running over the internet protocol. It's highly distributed. It's scalable. It really is a completely different architecture. I've got, later on in this presentation, I've got a few slides that sort of give you the overall impression of just how distributed this really is. And again, going back to my point, why it's so important that the IT organization merge with the telephony organization and they understand each other in ways that are critical to make this successful. Of course, you always create presentations and then you review them 5 minutes before the training. Standards based. That's another one that I would put on here. How many of you have heard the term or phrase generic SIP fund? In the old days, not that long ago, 20, 30 years ago, you couldn't take any more time to make it more fun to buy it. Okay. And so that's another reason why it's expensive, right? You had vendor lock. The vendors were able to really hold their prices up pretty well. It was much less competitive then than it is now. And I'll talk about that later on as well, what environment we're working in. But that's the one that I would add is really standard. So what happened in 1995? This gives me the opportunity to share a little bit about my personal story. So I joined Cisco actually in 1999. The year before, Cisco acquired a company called Celsius, a small little company out of Richardson, Texas. I think they had less than 100 employees. And they built this little box, this voice over IP box, and it supported roughly 100 users. So Cisco, I didn't do the research to find out how much they spent on Celsius, but I can guarantee you it's much less than $1 billion, much less than it was for WebEx, Broadsoft, and many other acquisitions that they made. So they got a bargain on this stuff. The reason they bought this company is they saw opportunity. Initially, they saw opportunity not in the voice piece of it, but in the network, because light bulbs went off. They said, oh, we have real-time voice traffic now going across the network. Not a dedicated line from a PBX to a phone, but it's shared. It's a shared medium. That has implications, a number of implications. So upgrade opportunity, right? We can go back to our install base. We'll get this started. We'll use Celsius and we'll kind of get this started. And all the vendors will jump on and drive it forward. And we'll sit back. And even if we're not successful in voice, we'll sell a lot of that. It took about a year when we changed the technique for Cisco to realize, actually, there's a lot of money in this industry, and why not us? And so everything really changed about a year after they acquired. I was there at the time. One of the things that I did very early on there at Cisco, in fact, I started in 2001, is I started with 2 people. Over the 7 years that I led this team, it grew to 30 people. And what they were technical marketing engineers. The challenge that we had, and everybody in the industry had, is, okay, Cisco, you blew up the PBX. You're going to customers and you're saying, you don't need this PBX anymore. We've got a different way to do it. The problem was nobody understood what that was, what it meant, how to do it right, how to pitfalls to avoid. And so one of the most exciting things I've ever done in my career was to lead this team to figure it out. Now, our mantra was, well, if your best friend came to you and said, hey, I'm interested in voice, what would you tell them? And so we were sort of the truth and advertising. We had organic labs, we took a lot of gear from Amazon, Cisco, as well as a bunch of third-party stuff, and we figured out how it all worked. We documented it, we went out, we evangelized it to customers directly, in executive briefing sessions, or we went out to Cisco. We used to have a networker, now it's called Cisco Live, but that was also an opportunity to educate. There's a lot of education that happens. Whenever that happens, it you've got something where the learning curve is 0 or 1, credit card. What's the learning curve for a credit card? You use it, and there is no learning curve. But when there is a learning curve, everything goes. So what happened since VoIP kind of came on? TDM, that's the first acronym that I used, and I did not define it. So TDM is time division contact. All it really means is that I don't want anymore to have single lines for every single connection. Right? You certainly don't want, if you got 50 users in your company and you have a PDX, you don't need 50 lines coming into that PDX from the PSTN. Right? You should have 1 or 2 lines that are shared media. Time division, multi-touch division. You can handle multiple calls at the same time. So what else happened? Really was brutal for companies that did not adapt fast enough. Nortel is the classic example. Cisco is really good example. Nortel, although Nortel they were not fast enough to realize the threat as well as the opportunity. And it's a real problem for every company. It's a historic sort of a classic case of not paying attention to what's going on in your industry. They're happy based on your current revenue streams, and they're not trying to keep you down to cannibalize your current sales, because if you don't, someone else will. So that happens a lot. The other thing that's been happening for a long time now is smartphones. And this affects our business as well, and it will continue to do so. But the smartphone sales have definitely been on the decline for the last years. As a percentage of growth, right? Certainly, there's more and more people coming into the workforce, so you would expect a reasonable mapping of that growth to phones. I haven't used a phone, a desk phone. It's now 7 years. And I worked at telecommunications companies, right? I worked at Plantronics, no phone on my desk. And I've been here now a year and a half, no phone on my desk, because I find this device and the device in my pocket totally okay. My last point on this slide is confusion, right? Cisco went to market with this very complex, distributed system. It's not a solution anymore. It's really a system of a bunch of interlocking parts, and it was really hard. It took a long time to educate our internal people who were trying to sell it, our technical people who were trying to support it, partners needed to understand it, and most importantly, customers. And customers had a real hard time getting their head around what the implications for this were. So my most technical slide. So this is what the world prior to VoIP looked like. And I've simplified a lot, but this is actually, I just kept the existing diagram for that, but 30 years ago that wasn't there either. But you did have PSTN access, right? You had to go out to the public switch telephone network in order to go beyond your 4 walls of your company. And the way that the old technology works and the way that the new technology works is signaling is very important. When you pick up a phone, and this was true in the old days too, when you pick up a phone and go off hook, there's a signal that gets sent, that gets interpreted by some brain somewhere downstream. It goes, oh, Jack wants to make a call. Let's see what he does, right? And Jack starts dialing numbers. It goes to the brain. So the signaling path always goes through the PBX, right? It goes through the PBX. Oh, it's a call to Jack's grandmother in Minnesota. So I got to go out to the PSTN and send that same message out there. In this case, though, what I've shown, it's a little, this is a little misleading, but the media, it's a good example because the media itself is separated from the signaling, right? If, in the case that I gave where Jack is calling his grandmother, that green line tracks pretty much exactly to the destination, right? There is a wire, you can physically trace a wire all the way back. But again, big benefit of PBXs is that if I call Jack, actually that red line stays within the PBX as well. So why doesn't it scale? All media and signaling go through the PBX. So what that means is if I have an sudden increase of people calling me or I need to call out on the PSTN, I have to look at my capacity. I may have to call my vendor and ask for more line card or trunk cards. They probably are going to roll a truck and come out and slip some new trunk cards into my PBX. So that didn't scale too well, and again, expensive. Every desktop. So in the old days, if I had a computer and a phone on my desk, there's 2 cables that went to that. There was the telephony cable and there was the Cat5 cable. Now, of course, we have wireless. You don't see that as much anymore. That was one of the big value propositions when we first started to disrupt the industry was we said, hey, one wire. That worked really, really well for what are called greenfield accounts where I'm building a new building. By the way, just slight digression, but there's earth-moving equipment on Via de Ventura and 101. I don't know if anyone noticed that, but they've cleared it out. Yeah, so that's greenfield. That's greenfield. 20 years ago, we would have been talking to Nextiva and saying, hey, you know what? Go with VoIP because all you need is one Cat5 cable or wireless, and you could do both. You could do both your data on your PC as well as voice on your telephone, on your IP phone. So voice over IP is quite different. The signaling is still the same. You still have to have a signaling path to to basically direct where the media is going. And when I pick up a phone and I call somebody, I'm making a call. There's a bunch of SIP messaging going on between the endpoint and the soft switch. And lost my train of thought, sorry. And so once that is established, then we're into something called mid-call control. So that is a stateful thing going on between the endpoint and the soft switch. Let's say I want to transfer. I'm on a call with Jack and I want to transfer to Alex. Basically, I do some buttons on the phone or my soft phone on my Mac, and the soft switch understands that, redirects media accordingly. The big difference between the old way and the VoIP way is that once that is established, once the signaling path is established and it knows where to direct the media, it drops out. You're not going through, the media is not going through the soft switch at all, which makes it incredibly more scalable than the old way of doing things. So what are the benefits of voice? Again, the one that I left out that I'll talk about first because I left it out and feel bad about it is standards. So this is a big one, right? Suddenly customers are like, you know, and this is, by the way, a threat to our industry as well, right? The switching cost to go from Nextiva to RingCentral, or for that matter, RingCentral back to Nextiva, are lower in this model, significantly lower. I don't have to buy a bunch of new phones because it only works with Nextiva. If I've got SIP phones, and that includes whether they're Cisco or really any phone, as long as they support the SIP standard, we would be able to use them as an endpoint. So the other benefits, I mentioned the cable drop to every desktop. It's a more scalable architecture. It's also much easier to deal with remote locations, which was a challenge in the old world. You had things like what were called key systems that could be standalone, could be connected to the PBX at the headquarter location, but expensive. You generally speaking, don't want to minimize the amount of hardware that you got distributed across your entire organization. With voice over internet, you need an internet connection, right? You need stuff that you've already bought, a router, a session border controller, a firewall, whatever it is in your organization, you've already got it. You're just leveraging that. It's less expensive. And I put in theory intentionally because the truth of the matter is that if you're the type of company that, buys a PBX and only uses it for 4 or 5 years, then yeah, it's probably more cost-effective to go with a SaaS model, a cloud-based model. But what we found at Cisco, and this was an impediment to our growth as well as our competitors at the time, is that there's a lot of companies out there that do something called what is called sweating the asset, meaning, look, we've depreciated this thing, or we're close to fully depreciating this multi-million-dollar box in my company. What's my incentive, really, financial incentive? It all works, right? Nobody's telling me I've got to go to VoIP, so why would I just wait until it falls over and die, and then I'll call Cisco, right? Generally speaking, though, what would happen over time is that Nortel, Cisco, Nortel, Avaya, these old players would eventually come to these customers and say, we're end-of-lifing that, right? This is going away. You're going to have to make a decision. Or the other thing that was a very compelling event for customers to look at VoIP is we've got a new maintenance contract for you to sign here, right? And it's, wow. It's a maintenance contract that involves like a hardware upgrade or whatever. And, and that's getting into the hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars as well. So that was one of the opportunities a lot of the new VoIP vendors took, was that they could figure out ways of finding out which customers kind of fell into that category so that they could go after them. So some of the benefits, the biggest one I think a lot of customers really liked is time to value. In the old days, when you bought a TDM-based PBX, it could take months to actually get it all set up, deploy it for the customer. It was not a trivial exercise. There was a lot to it. There was no nice graphical user interface for a lot of this stuff. A lot of these were done configured via command line interface, where you had to send some technicians or group of technicians off to class at your expense for a week or two to become an expert on the Nortel system or the Avaya system. Actually, at the time, it was Lucent. Avaya came later, but you get the idea. Whereas with VoIP, it's like, hey, give me a phone, make sure my internet connection's okay, make sure my network can handle real-time voice. This is our business, right? We do this, get people up and running pretty quickly. Productivity. It's kind of nice to be able to not be tied always to your physical location. And VoIP definitely changed that. And it wasn't just hosted voice, it was also on-prem voice could help with that as well. You should be able to communicate, collaborate anytime, anywhere, any device, right? The third one is one I mentioned earlier. 2008, Great Recession happens. People were very receptive to an argument that went like, look, we understand your contract's running out with Lucent. You're going to have to spend $500,000 to get it to where you need it to be. We have an answer for you, right? It's basically you're ripping all that stuff out, or you're migrating. There was lots of migration schemes that were developed along the way, so they didn't have to totally replace everything day one. But for these users that you got on the new system, you're only going to pay for what you need, and you're only going to pay per month, pay as you go. So that was a big benefit. If you're doing hosted VoIP, the need for on-prem IT/telephony people goes down dramatically, right? We're doing a lot of that stuff for the customer. We don't have to train them necessarily on how to do command line interface. We do have training sessions to teach them how to use the portals and the apps and so forth. But it really does decrease, and that a lot of customers looked at this as an opportunity to reduce certainly their telephony staff, if not their IT staff as well. And again, in theory, less expensive. If you're interested in this argument, there's plenty of ink spilled over this particular argument, so you might want to Google it if you're interested. There's debates raging on all sides. For me, it hinges really on the time frame we're talking about there, but the other problem that a lot of people have is they don't account for the fact that they've taken some people out of the equation, that they don't have to spend that money on the headcount for anymore. So what are the challenges? How am I doing on time? Okay, good. So what are the challenges? This is not an exhaustive list, but as I mentioned, with every new technology, there's always challenges, right? There's always something that pops up that's like, oh, what about that, right? And the three kind of big ones are packet loss. So we experience this still today, right? Where suddenly it's like, well, Ralph, stop talking. What happened there? And it's gone. He's gone for 3 seconds and he's back, right? Now, that could have been an internet down connection, but packet loss in general is a real problem. We're not talking about, oh, I have to wait 10 seconds versus 3 for my PowerPoint to download. This is real-time traffic. If you miss it, it's gone, right? It's not like Cindy's going to say something again and repeat the conversation. So real-time traffic is very sensitive to data loss. It's also sensitive to delay, and we've probably experienced this. In the beginning, by the way, these three things wreaked havoc. So many calls were just unusable and just terrible in the beginning until we figured out how we were going to tackle some of these things. But delay is the same problem. You need, and jitter, and I'll talk about those two together. It's not just the delay of packets arriving in the user's ear, but it's also the order in which they're doing. All of that's really, really important, right? Power. So even in the old days, phones needed power. And they got that through either the PBX or in Centrex through the central office. How are they going to get it in this brave new world? So the initial, the first probably million phones that we sold at Cisco came with a power brick in it, right? It's like, hey, you know, if you don't have a way to get power to that phone, you plug it in. No one liked that, right? That was a terrible, terrible solution. So the answer to this, and this goes back to Cisco capitalizing on their core business, which was routing and switching, is the invention of power over Ethernet happened. And that's really important because I got a cable, a Cat5 cable coming from my switch to my phone. I also have a cable running from my phone to my PC. And the cable running from my phone back into the switch is powered via the switch. So that was an incredible upgrade opportunity for Cisco to take advantage of. And it didn't matter to Cisco whether it was a Cisco voice solution or a Avaya voice solution. They made money either way on that. But it was solved. You know, it was solved. No one does the bricks anymore, I don't think. So for hosted and UCaaS specifically, some of the other challenges that we faced were this perception, especially as you get up market and you start to service some of the larger customers, the two things that we kept hearing over and over again, and you will still hear this today in the customers that we go after. I don't know, doesn't seem very secure to me, or it doesn't seem very reliable to me, right? So those are things that had to be addressed, and they were. Again, I'll show you a kind of a mind-blowing slide in a few slides that sort of portray this. And then the last one is sales compensation models. This doesn't sound like a big deal, but if you're a Cisco and you have a sales force of exceptional salespeople, and they do, and you tell them suddenly, yeah, remember when you used to go off to Boeing and you used to sell them like $4 million of gear and they'd write a check and you'd get like whatever, 3, 4, 5% of that, kerching, right? Remember those days? They're going away, right? Instead, we've got this other model where we are going to go out and we're going to say, you don't have to do that anymore, customer. What you're going to do is just pay us as you go. There might be some upfront fees to set it up, but pretty much you're going to pay that $4 million over a long period of time. I can't tell you how many meetings, countless hours of meetings I was in with sales leadership, engineering leadership, pretty much the whole company, trying to figure out how we solve this problem. And it's still a problem for many companies, but the way that Cisco solved it ultimately is if you sell the hosted voice solution or the UCaaS solution, and it would have been $4 million had you sold it on-premise, we're going to pay you as though it was $4 million. So kind of risky, especially with early terminations and various other things that could wreak havoc on that. But that's essentially how they solved it. Not elegant, but it was a challenge, and it still is. So courtesy of John Robinson, who works in our voice engineering team, I got him to lend me this slide. Pretend you didn't see any IP addresses, and don't tell him that you're seeing IP addresses on here. This is an internal audience, so I trust you all not to go off and hack our network. But this really speaks to high availability and redundancy, right? When we do VoIP surveys and we ask customers, various questions about various vendors, including ourselves, this is where we get our highest marks. And it's a tribute to a lot of really talented people who work, some of them are in this room, who work every single day making sure that voice infrastructure is solid, it's reliable, it's redundant, all of that stuff. I'm not going to go through in any detail here. One thing that I could foresee in the future is maybe a drill down on something like this in the future, not led by me, but someone more technical that can speak to more detail. So lots of challenges: delay, loss, jitter, all of those challenges that I mentioned. How did the industry solve them? So again, standards started to happen. Cisco drove a lot of those. But quality of service is really probably one of the more important ones. Quality of service and call admission control. Remember the diagram that I showed where there was a wire coming from the PSTN into that old-fashioned PBX? Well, that was pretty constrained. It was like if it was a T1 or an E1, you don't need to know what those are, but that's what they sold. That's what like AT&T would sell. And they still do to some extent. You knew how many voice channels you can handle on each of those lines. So if you need more, you just add more. With call admission control, it depends. Call admission control was an invention designed to basically replicate that same idea. The problem is that you don't know if that voice traffic is coming back and forth over what's called a high compression codec, which makes it a very small kind of payload, or is it coming over what's called G711, which is the normal protocol or standard that we all hear when we pick up a phone and talk, or even a high definition type of a standard. So call admission control is a way in which to engineer that pipe to accommodate that. So basically it tells you how much bandwidth that you're going to need to add based on what traffic you're expecting in and out. RSVP, I forget what that stands for, but it's basically reserving some bandwidth in order to make calls. But going back to quality of service, so I sort of alluded to the fact that you got a wire coming from your wiring closet, from your switch in your wiring closet, that on the north side of that connects to a router that can connect out to the big wide world. The wire that's the Cat5 cable coming into your hard phone on your desk oftentimes has another port to where you can put in your PC. Again, one cable, that's the value prop. You don't have to have multiple cables coming to every desktop. But what happens if I'm on my PC and I've got a 40 gig presentation that I want to upload to Hannah to do a presentation? You don't want a situation where that's trying to go, it's going through the phone, up, into over IP. You don't want that voice, and then I get a call from Ralph, you don't want that voice to take second fiddle to a PowerPoint presentation. So really quality of service is the idea of marking traffic. Basically it's a standard by which we say, hey, I know what this is, it's voice traffic, or it's video traffic. It's real-time traffic that you can't delay, right? So I'm going to mark that, and then I'm going to engineer my entire network to make sure that on every single hop, it is prioritizing that. It's not letting the big PowerPoint presentation get behind or interfere with that transmission. So that was really a very critical piece of the puzzle that helped make everything go a lot more smoothly. Actually, I wasn't done with this. I did mention Power over Ethernet. SRTP is another one that I wanted to talk about because we're in the midst of a project right now where we're going to encrypt some voice. And this is really what it is. So the standard protocol for voice in our business is RTP. It's real-time protocol. And you want to secure it, if you want to encrypt that traffic, you use a protocol called SRTP. So we're actually going to be doing that. We're still undetermined about the exact rollout plan for that. We're meeting, I think, tomorrow to suss all of that out. But that really is an important piece of the puzzle as well because more and more customers, especially larger ones, kind of expect that to be there. And then lastly, PSTN failover, right? So what happens if my internet doesn't work anymore and I still need to make calls, right? And so we definitely have customers that are very interested in that as well. So you definitely have to do that. So this must be at least a 10, if not 15-year-old diagram. I mentioned that I spent 6-7 years at Cisco running this team of technical marketing engineers. This is the kind of stuff that we would produce to kind of educate the world in what it all is. But you could see just the complicated nature of it, right? We've got real-time traffic running on a network. That means that IT can't go, into the wiring closet and start moving wires around. Change control is suddenly really, really important. They can't go into routers and change the routing list or the routing tables or the ACLs in order to do what they want in some other part of the business, not realizing or knowing that it's affecting voice. This, I don't know how much it happens anymore, but this used to happen all the time. And one of our big talking points whenever we'd sit down with customers, especially if around the table there were IT people, networking people, desktop people, and voice people. We really emphasize you guys need to work together. You need to have change control because it's really easy to mess things up along the way if you're not careful with your change control procedures. But that's all I'll say about this slide. You can see that it's a pretty robust set of things going on. And here's more of a diagram view of this. And the other thing that Cisco became very aware of, especially with larger customers, and this is unlike Nextiva, who started off really addressing the smaller end of the market, and for the most part we still do, Cisco's bread and butter was the large enterprises. And so things like high availability, resilience were incredibly important. By the way, that's becoming really important for us as well. Not a week goes by, Alex can back me up on this, but not a week goes by that we don't get 20, 30,000 MRR deals. So it's definitely, we're moving up market. And this is the stuff they care about is they want to know about redundancy, security, reliability, disaster recovery. So what does the market look like today? The best way that I could describe it is fragmented, right? There's over 100 players in this industry. We're one of about 120 players. I'll go through a few of them in a few slides, but they range from the big telcos, so AT&T, West, companies like this that have been selling voice services to customers for a long time. And oftentimes what you'll find is that when you look under the covers, they've got like multiple solutions going on. Maybe they partnered with BroadSoft, and that was a big deal. Like 80% of all the carriers around the world have some instance of BroadWorks in their network. It's just incredible. And that was true 10 years ago when I made the recommendation to Cisco leadership, which they summarily ignored, which was they should buy BroadSoft. Probably for a whole lot less back then. But it's big. It's a big industry, lots of players, but the opportunity is also pretty gigantic as well. And I've got a slide later that kind of shows that in a nice pictorial way. It's fast, it's big, and it's fast growing. The other thing that's been happening a lot is mergers and acquisitions, a lot of consolidation, and I would expect to see this over the next 5 to 10 years just accelerate. And you're also seeing it in sort of adjacent industries, like in the call center, contact center industry. This is happening a lot too, where a Genesys, for example, it's a big contact center player, vendor. They've been gobbling up companies like Alto Cloud, which does journey mapping, customer journey mapping, and tying that into their contact center. You saw NICE, which is a workforce optimization. They do call recording and things like that. They bought a contact center solution. So you're seeing a lot of consolidation and mergers. It's becoming a little more vertically integrated in a lot of cases. So cloud telephony has got the highest growth of any segment of this market. Are we out of time? Okay, I'll wrap it up. I'm almost done. So we've got 15.8% CAGR through 2021, but a decline in all the on-premise stuff. So that's typical of what you see when you see a transition like this. We're seeing Grandview Research estimates about a $3 billion market just in North America for the hosted voice piece. And this is a slide I was promising. So the size of the circle gives you an idea of the opportunity, lots of growth, as well as lots of compound annual growth as well. So that's the biggest segment of the market. Whereas premise-based telephony, buying a PBX and putting it in your own company, is declining rapidly. Some view of players here. We all know about RingCentral. 8x8 is also very big. This is a Gartner Magic Quadrant. The reason why we're not up here is that we don't sell internationally. So once we do that, we'll be able to be at least eligible to be on this thing as well. So I'll go over this quickly. We can follow up. Mobility is going to impact this industry. I think we're just scratching the surface on exactly what that's going to look like and how it's going to affect us. Microsoft versus Cisco has been, in the larger end of the market, has been an ongoing battle, and many customers use both. And so these fierce competitors have had to figure out how they cooperate. Impact of artificial intelligence. This is also going to be huge, especially in the call center, contact center market. And then CPaaS and APIs. APIs, if you're doing anything in this market without APIs, you're not going to last very long. Customers want and expect to be able to do their own things using your APIs. And then CPaaS is things like Twilio, Telestack, some of the other folks that basically say, hey, we've got an API and you could just do SMS, or you could just do voice, or you could do video. So that is also, we're seeing that a lot more as well. A couple of books. I've read all of these, and I just kept it to these because these are the ones that impressed me and influenced me the most. The one on the far left really is the best one to sort of give you an idea of why SaaS? How did SaaS even really come to be? Master Algorithm is all about AI, as is Machines of Loving Grace. And then the Age of Intent, there's an interesting call center company called 24/7, and they do a lot of AI-driven chatbots pretty successfully. So anyway, if you're interested in outside reading, I recommend those. And that's it. Any questions? So we have time for questions. All right, all right. No worries, no worries. Any questions, either online or in the room? Yeah.
Is there any plans for next year to do anything with mobile?
What are you thinking of?
Either sell mobile or I guess some of them become a mobile service provider.
Not that I'm aware of. So are you alluding to like IMS type of technologies where fixed line and mobile are sort of kind of all integrated now?
We have mobile service providers, mobile companies now.
Right.
Telephone companies be able to add mobile to our mix to
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. We should definitely bring that to the founders. I think it's going to be hugely disruptive for us if we don't do something that's more strategic and compelling.
Just want to say, it's the modern.
Yeah,
Relevant.
exactly. Right, exactly. Yeah, so there's a protocol, I guess it's a standard or a protocol, I don't know which, called IMS, IP Multimedia Subsystem. And the idea behind that is exactly what Jack is saying, is that I'm an organization and I've got these phones on my desk. I have some soft phones. I've got mobile. I want it all to be kind of, again, anywhere, any device. I want everything that I can do here to be done here. All the features, all the functionality. And that's been, people have been working on that for a long, long time. I don't know how much traction it actually has. It's been a while since I did a deep dive look at it. But it's pretty clear to me that mobile is going to eat all of this. It's not going to take that long. Any other questions?
I know in our product offerings, we sell a fully hosted voice service. We also sell SIP trunking. Could you tell us just a little bit about the target customers for those two different products?
So you asked me a question that you would prefer to answer? Yeah, so Alex talked about our trunking service. So come on up here. I'm going to let you. I'm serious. I think it's a question that you're going to be able to answer a little better than I am. So go ahead and ask your question to yourself. I need to give you a little limelight anyway.
Yeah, for sure. They're probably less elegant than Bob's delivery. So, as Bob pointed out, there's a lot of customers who are migrating or currently have on-prem PBXs that they might have invested tens, even hundreds of thousands of dollars into to support their current telephony needs. But as part of technology upgrades, they can migrate from using traditional landlines into more of an internet-based connectivity. And so instead of having to ditch all of the equipment that they've already invested in, and they're still trying to sort of milk the ROI and get the most out of that investment, they can keep using their PBX, but basically get the dial tone and the phone numbers from us instead of the current company. And so our fully hosted customers are getting all of their features, like the music on hold, the auto attendance, the dial by name directories, from our telephony product, whereas SIP trunking customers are essentially providing their own functionality from the PBX that they have on-prem, but then we just get them dial tone and phone numbers so that they can still use their existing equipment.
It's low, right? Yeah. Yeah, so I think it's similar. Thank you, Alex, by the way. It's similar to a situation that we have right now with SD-WAN. So we have customers saying, hey, you really need to offer a software-defined wide area networking solution. And it's the same thing. It's like, yeah, they can go off and do other vendors, but they would prefer to have one vendor's throat to choke. So I wasn't around to know the history as to why we brought it on, but I suspect it was that there was an expectation in the market that if you're a VoIP provider, you offer that as well. I don't know, Jack, if you've got any insight into that.
So again, back when we started this company, there's a large number of people that have PBXs, and we can offer them PBX trunks cheaper than everybody else. So that's why we have that market. And also because they have our trunks, we can now go back to them and offer them our instant solution in their PBX size.
Right. So it's a good migration strategy.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and those migration strategies are really important as you go up market, as you start to attract the attention of mid to large customers. because they're very risk averse. They're not going to rip and replace anything, no matter how often we tried at Cisco to do that, or maybe here as well. No one likes to do that, and so they're like, well, you know what? I'm spinning up a new branch office. Let's try that first, right? It's only got 5 users, but let's give that a whirl and see how it goes, and then have a path to ultimately migrate the entire company. So those types of offers and technologies really help with that. Ruth. Yes.
That Microsoft provides, and then they want to have it with another company. Is that something that we work with? If not, do we have that on the pipeline?
Yeah. So.
So that's the thing, right? So if you connect Estiva accounts to that service, then you're not going through Microsoft.
Right.
Then you're getting
Right.
the reliability of the Estiva voice within the base of Microsoft. So that is one use case.
Yeah. So you're right. So Microsoft has been a carrier, technically a carrier now, for 5 to 10 years. There were various executives within Cisco that tried to have Cisco do the same, become a carrier and be able to transport all of that traffic themselves. They decided not to do it. Microsoft's been doing it a while, and it's kind of comical because we actually do have a lot of customers that come to us and say, I still want to use Skype for Business, but that's going away too, by the way. It's being replaced at a very rapid clip by Microsoft Teams. Microsoft is pushing it like crazy, and they're actually getting a lot more traction on it. But the same problem emerges, which is I don't want to use Microsoft's back end, their network. I want to use somebody else. So the short answer is yes, we do have solutions in order to do that. Right now on the Skype for Business, which we're sort of de-emphasizing primarily because Microsoft is de-emphasizing it, it's going to go away, is we use a partner called Mondigo, and they have a product called Go Integrator. And that provides a fairly basic integration so that you can use Skype for Business, but you're essentially using our back-end voice network for it. And we're working with a company also called Tenfold, and Tenfold has the inside track. As we understand it, they have the inside track on developing an integration with Microsoft Teams. So that's why one of the reasons why we're partnering, potentially partnering up with them, because they're going to be able to get to market faster with the API, with the brand new APIs that Microsoft is coming out with. So they're sort of in an iterative process right now with Microsoft with their in beta APIs right now for that. So yeah, it's definitely a use case, and we can handle it. Any questions online? All right. I guess where we're at. Thank you, everyone. Really.